if you grip something too tight, then your forearms gets rigid, right? Mainly because your wrist becomes rigid. So when you hold, like holding a hammer, if you use a hammer, when you hold it, if you hold it too tight, your wrist can't move. If your wrist can't move, then there's not going to be that action. So how a hammer works is because it's got a flat head on it. If you don't use your wrists on the bottom of that stroke, the head of the handle will not be flat. So if you hold it tight and you go like this, you're always going to hit the top of the head and it's going to bend. People that use a hammer a lot, especially like carpenters, they were going to swing, and the timing and accuracy of that position is always there. Now, when you go like this, it's like you're punching down like that. You see what I just let the wrist go? So when you go like that, the release of the power from the arm stroke gets projected into the object because that's transferring of energy. So if you're doing this and you don't relax the wrists, then your sword is not going to chop down. So if say you're a butcher and you're using a cleaver and you're chopping into bone or joints, if you don't do this when you use your cleaver, you never cut through it because you don't have the action that hits, and then the shape of the blade allows it to hit and cut. So that's why cleavers and knives have their shape, because when you press down and draw, that's where the slice comes from. So the same with this. When you chop down, it's just abrupt and it just penetrates. But if you want to penetrate and then slice, you have to draw. So if you chop down and you draw, that's the cut. So anytime you're cutting, your wrist has to be like this. Do you know when a surgeon does a cut and it's very refined, it's down to fingertip control because it's a refined motor skill. They don't use their arm because if they use their arm, it's going to be too deep, and there's no sensitivity to the arm, to the fingertip, because of the strength involved. The big muscles work to create too much power, too much strength. So it has to be refined to the fingers based on the pivot point of the other joints. You have to stabilize some and move some. That's how it's created. So refined movement is a combination of that. When we move this way, something has to be stabilizing something. This has to be stabilizing something when you move forward. So that's the trick. And it's not really a trick, but it's what your body and mind has to go through as part of the analysis of motion. So we just feed it enough information, and then it starts to define it over time. But here again, it can't define something it doesn't know you as an objective or a goal. So if you're using a scalpel and you want to create a very fine line versus a scar that's going to be like that thick, then you would want to make that cut as delicate as possible, so when it heals it's going to be very thin. But if you're just crude about it, then when it heals it's going to be a lot of damage there.
Do you just the right way and then the wrong way and then the right way?
Of which one? Okay, so if you went like this with your arm, that would be not in the form. If you go like this, then your wrist is not creating. So without the wrist, the hand's not going to do that. Without the wrist, it's not going to do that. So if the wrist is like this, then the movement is going to be like that. But that's just the wrist. You have an arm because you can't move something this big with just your wrist. This is not a scalpel, this is a sword. So when I go like this, and I go like this, and I go like this, that's the phasing of movement, or the integration of that. So where this happens, where this happens, where this happens, and where this happens, and this happens, is the timing to get to the end point. So if we go like this, and you hold the wrist too tight, then your blade's going to end up like that, because you can't turn it enough if your forearm becomes tight. So if you can just experiment, let's hold it fairly tight and then drop the elbow like this, and look where the sword is going to be unless you turn it more. So turning it more becomes excessive in the arm. If you just kind of relax the hand, get your elbow in the right position, and you're going to be much more vertical. And if you want you to be in the center line, then you have to find your center by bringing this hand in here. Now if you do this slice and your elbow's out like this, then it's never going to get in your center, because it has to be here. So that has to be this position. So everything's tied to position of the body. You know, that's posture, right? When you stand up and they say you have bad posture when you're a little kid, what was that? You don't recognize that you're leaning like this, or your body's that. So they would said, well, let's create good posture. So you straighten it up. So then over time, if you stand like that all the time, like the military people, they're always in this erect position, and that's the military position, because that's the look. But that typically is good posture. But the military position is not a good posture for something like Tai Chi or martial arts, because the military position's too rigid. Because you're not in motion, it's okay. But once you're in motion, then we actually have kind of a sloping shoulder and a downward move, because we want our center of gravity to be more, lower, and our configuration of the torso is modified for the positions. So here we might be like this, and we're kind of rounded here, because in a rounded position you have better structure integrity for your posture. When we're like this, your hand, your wrist has to be bent here, so that the tiger's mouth that holds the top of this handle is there. So your tiger's mouth is in line with the back of the sword, the spine of the sword. It goes down, so it's more like this. So when you're like this, your wrist actually flexes like this in order to have that line. So that's ergonomics. You don't hold like this is just like the shape of a handle on a hammer, actually. You see how it's curved down? So that's how a hammer is. And when you hold the hammer, that V thing, the trigonal, is actually up here. That gives you the vertical line. And the reason why they designed the sword like this, with the curved handle, and why isn't it straight like a straight sword, is because ergonomically, when you stroke down with this, it allows for a wrist that's not quite as flexible in that direction, but it allows you to drive it, and that the curve of this and the curve of the handle on the sword combined will give you the flat head on impact on the vertical direction. So that regulating of that movement, it becomes this. So when you chop, if you stopped in the horizontal, it would be like this. But we actually go down more to the 45-degree line. Or we might chop, like in this one, we're in the horizontal position. So if you chop like this, if you don't finish the wrists, then you're not going to have a slice at the end. Yeah. You ever see those demonstrations where they chop a watermelon on someone's belly? Right? And everybody watches that, and it's kind of like, why doesn't he cut through the watermelon and hit the person's stomach? Because when you're standing like this and you chop, this is horizontal. It doesn't go below this unless you do this. So here, when you finish it, that's a position. So you know to stop that. If you want to cut through, that would cut through. So that's finishing the wrist like that. But because when they cut the watermelon, it's a kind of a trick. They cut on impact. As soon as it goes to there, you twist your sword like that, and it splits the watermelon. So they cut halfway through the watermelon, then you do that. Yeah. And you use your wrist. Yeah, it's your wrist. Yeah. Yeah. Because you have control. And the control actually, yeah, because the other hand is always there. But your other hand, the way you use a knife or a cleaver, when cutting vegetables very thin, you're relying on this hand. This hand does the same movement over and over again. This finger, the hand is moving. So it moves like regulating how much thickness you have, and then it moves and it moves and it moves and it moves and it moves. And that's how you regulate. It's this hand that's the gauge. This hand is the action. And they work together like that. And the reason most people cut their finger is because they don't know how to use this hand. So they're using this to gauge. You use this, the whole. If it's like a wide cleaver, your finger can be like this. And you don't go higher than this position, and then you move it down. Yeah. It's yeah, like that. Yeah. 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 So if you hold it like this, you're using this finger as a yeah. Yeah. That's how you use the Chinese cleaver. And then when you chop, I learned that when I was a kid. My dad had a restaurant. So how do you use a knife, a cleaver? And I know I learned the hard way too, because I chopped my finger one time, and I still have the scar from it. I was 12 years old when I did that, and I cried all the way to the hospital. I had 6 stitches, and I cut my finger chopping onions.
You were 4 years old?
No, 12. So before, let me tell you this story. I cut my index finger, and when it healed, I got a cyst on my index finger. It grew on my index finger, so a cyst grew on my index finger because a piece of nail tissue got in there, and when it that's that scar, yeah. So I had a big lump there, and it grew as a piece of it was a cyst or a ganglia, whatever. It was same thing, I think, but it grew in there, and then I had it removed. They took it out, then it grew back again. They took it out because they didn't remove the tissue, the nail tissue, because nails grow, and so then the third time it grew back, I took it out myself, and it never grew back. Yeah. Yeah. No, I actually kept rubbing it until I irritated the skin so it kept growing and growing, and it grew until it wanted to come out by itself. And then one day I saw a little pinhole developing there, and then it kept going. It was getting kind of tender and kind of growing, but no inflammation. It was just growing under there. So then I went in there and with a pair of tweezers and I pulled the thing out, and when it came out, no, it's a little ball. And then when it came out, I poured alcohol on it to sterilize it, but it didn't bleed because it was just under. But the funny thing is, I left it on my bureau there. The next day it dried up. It was like a piece of nail.
Like a nail that grows.
A fingernail. Yeah. And it did. So.
You had strong fingernails. For it to grow so hard.
No, it's still, yeah. You see the scar. Yeah.
I know, but I'm saying is that you must have had really strong nails.
Yeah, I guess so.
Pulling it out and then finding it like.
but that's where it was. It's just so those are life experiences that.
Never forget about that.
So when we talk about chopping, that's so every time I cut onions. Anyways, let's do it. Let's do the sword form again. Okay. But we learn from our mistakes, right? Okay, deep breathing. So because these movements are big, the elbow is very important in helping to create the motion. Because without the elbow, then it's only your wrist. So you have to actually include the elbow in this upper part of your arm so that you can create a partial movement and then tie it together with, if it's horizontal, to the waist. And when you get to this position where it's the waist cut that's horizontal, then fold the elbow before you lift it over your head. Because if you don't fold the elbow before you lift over your head, then you're doing this. And that becomes, yeah, so fold it, bring it over, and then where does this other hand go? When you fold it and goes over, you want to get this hand out of the way so then you're on top of it, you see. So that just helps, clearing that sword so you don't end up. So now when you're over here and you're clearing this side, it would be horizontal here. Now if you want to go from here to the vertical position, now you're here first, right? So the elbow's slanted. So if you're still like this, then there's some tension here. Relax the shoulder and then move from the elbow and then approach vertical like you're doing a brush knee, right? So the important thing is to know where the sword is going next and then tie it to the direction of motion. Otherwise, the movement gets forced and then your shoulder will get compromised. Yeah, shouldn't. Well, when we bring the sword over the head, it's really, if you're holding it here in the hand and you go over, if you just lift your arm over your head like you're supposed to, without thinking you're taking the sword over, a lot of times people think they're doing this. But the sword will just drape on the backside as you come over the top. So, yeah, so you just relax the shoulder. Because if you're doing this, your shoulder actually is tight, and then you try to do the movement, and it will interfere with that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's that. Then on the vertical cuts, if you're going to this side, say we slice up like this, and you go into the other side, get it to vertical, and then push it around, get it to horizontal, then drop it down. And this is just how your circle is. So on this side, it gets the vertical here, then you drop the arm, and then it starts to come up. Then it gets the horizontal here, then it gets the vertical here. Put this hand here. Then there's your back side. Here's your vertical to the front. Then it goes up, it goes down, and you just build that control. So your movements will be, yeah. So how do you get it so that you're not chopping to that corner? It's your torso position. Now in the shoulder width position, it's harder to get to your shoulder position like this, but it's a little easier when you're here because our legs are really halfway there. So when we turn, it's not such a drastic turn. So when we push forward like this, then we can come to the center, and then because we're partially there, then it becomes vertical. So you're still chopping to the rear corner. So Colleen, you're still chopping to the rear corner on your transitions. You're still chopping to the rear corner when you're coming forward. They should be behind you. Yeah. So you should be behind you. If you want a line that's going to be a vertical line if it's complete in a circle. So you don't want your sword to be over there and then try to find your center. See what I mean? Yeah. Is that clear? Do you understand? Yeah. Why? Because the torso is not turning enough. Yeah. So you have to tie the movement and smooth it out, because if you abruptly turn like that, then it throws off your sword. So you have to work through those, work through the timing. The timing is the phase and the motion. So every phase is a sort of a postural positioning, how your torso is relative to this space, where your leg is relative to the space. So it's dealing with space is what most humans are pretty much challenged with. That unless you're a super athlete, you're always thinking of your space, and then they train toward that. How do these skiers or these gymnasts or these even cyclists that do all those, like jumping the hills and all that, or skateboarders, it's tremendous body control, and they're dealing with space, time, and so they do that kind of stuff. It's that difficult, going up and down at 40 miles an hour. This should be not as bad, right? Yeah. So, skateboarders, if you don't break something, you have it. Yeah. So, any questions? No. All right. So we can switch up to the straight sword.
Relax, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Notice there's a difference between the left and the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can do the left cut and it makes this really loud swish, and on the right it's not there, but it helps a little bit if I do what you were saying. That's why I was over in the corner practicing. I was hearing what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Practicing trying to make cut, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, because you're lefty, you have more.
I'm just more relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you do it on your right, it doesn't know how to regulate it. Yeah. So it's just. It's good. Yeah. Okay, ready? Want to run through it straight sword? Oh, then. The what? Oh, the music? Okay, deep breathing. Yeah. So you hold your sword like this, then when you start, you can fold it like this. So it's, yeah. So when you're here, then you're like this. Not like this, see? So this is, so that would be swinging like that. Then you step up, you just fold and push out, fold, turn, and push. And this wraps around like this. Then you're horizontal like that. And then this drops down, then it's pointing 45 degrees as you turn. Then it goes in that 45-degree direction. Then you turn it up, cross behind, and then open the stance. Then you move forward. Yeah. And then you chop behind, then slice up, then sit back, then step through to like a leaning stance, then come up, pull back, drop down, set it up for diagonal flying stroke like that, cross to the 45 center, press down, thrust, then turn to the rear corner or that front corner there, and then 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, down, lift, press, and thrust. Turn, cross step behind, over the head, face the corner, turn, chop, That's it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other side. To this side. No, wrong side. Yeah, on the other side.
So I was just doing this before, and then I saw you doing something extra, and I was getting a little confused.
Well, it's not extra, it's just that the body, more of the body's involved. If I do this, that's what you're doing. But when you do this, because I'm sinking and then I'm turning, so as the body becomes more familiar with the space, then you're gonna, everything that happens is creating the movement, the pattern within the space, and how astute your body is and your mind is really what you're capturing as emotion. Because again, what we don't know, we don't know. So if this is what we know, then this is what you get. But then if you're sitting back, if you're here and you're sitting, then you have to combine something with the integration of the motion, because it has to make up. So the more parts the moving, the more things that are happening that you can't actually bring into learning it in this sequentially in the beginning. Yeah. Okay, so we'll bow out.
Going to the same place, just using my body more than I was.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, ready? Up. I think the electrician might